Good morning, everyone. My name is Beatriz Grinsztejn. I am an infectious disease clinician and researcher based at Fundação Oswaldo Cruz in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I am the IAS President-elect, and it's a big honor to me to moderate this important Heart of Stigma webinar. Thanks to considerable medical progress, including antiretroviral therapy, people living with HIV can live long and healthy lives and cannot sexually transmit HIV when treatment is effective. Effective HIV prevention, more specifically HIV pre-exposure and post-exposure prophylaxis, are increasingly available to the different communities, also helping to decrease HIV incidence. With access to healthcare, HIV is now considered a manageable chronic condition. However, HIV remains amongst the most stigmatized medical conditions in the world, and combating HIV-related stigma is central to global efforts to end the HIV epidemic. This webinar is the second of a series of HIV-related stigma hosted by the International AIDS Society, the IAS, and the People Living with HIV Stigma Index partnership. The first webinar took place 2 weeks ago and focused on the importance of evidence-based advocacy programs. The panelists discussed strategies and best practices for advocating for interventions to eliminate HIV stigma and discrimination. Today, we will focus on the power of language in the HIV response and the importance of addressing internalized stigma experienced by people living with HIV. We aim to explore the impact of internalized stigma on people living with HIV, where negative societal messages lead to feelings of worthlessness and shame. We will explore programs that have adopted successful strategies to reduce the negative impact of internalized stigma and to develop self-worth. We will also discuss the importance of stakeholders in the HIV response using respectful language to support the dignity and agency of people living with HIV. Before we start, please put the slide of housekeeping points. We have a few housekeeping points to address. All participants of this webinar are muted. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. There will be a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. Interpretation is available in English, French, and Spanish. And to access live translation, please click the Earth icon at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred channel. The recording of this webinar will be available on the platform IAS Plus after the webinar. We will first have a presentation from Nadine Ferris France that will be followed by a panel discussion, and we will have time for questions from the audience. We really want this to be very interactive. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Nadine Ferris France. She is the co-founder and executive director of Beyond Stigma. Nadine has spent 25 years working in HIV and global health within the United Nations and civil society agencies, as well as in academic institutions in Asia, Africa, and her home country, Ireland. So it's our great pleasure to have Nadine with us. Please, Nadine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Beatrice, and good afternoon or good evening, good morning to everybody who's listening. So today I'm going to try in a very short, in 10 minutes, to touch on what is internal stigma and why it's important, with a little bit about language. I'm going to show you inside an evidence-based intervention to address internal stigma called Wakakosha. And my hope is that I leave you inspired to tackle internal stigma within yourself and within whatever programs, research, or clinics you're operating. So why is it important to understand what internal or self-stigma or internalized stigma is? Well, because unless I'm aware of what it is and how it moves inside me, I cannot change it. So we talk of internal stigma, but what actually is it? So here's the definition. Definition matters. Internal stigma is a mindset of negative beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors about HIV, which manifests as shame, as guilt, as feelings of contamination, self-loathing, low self-esteem, and self-rejection. This is the definition that we use, so we are really clear what we're dealing with when we design programs, when we carry out formative research, and when we try to measure interventions. This is the definition. This, as I said, definition really matters. But, you know, definition is one thing, but what does that actually mean in people's lives? Well, a young 19-year-old woman called Memory, who I've worked with in Zimbabwe, she stopped, if you go back to the last slide, please, she stopped taking her medication. Why? Fundamentally and deep down, she always felt that she doesn't deserve to live. She believes that HIV is a punishment from God to her and to her parents before her. She feels dirty, not good enough. She fears that she will never have a boyfriend, a child of her own, a decent job. And she's sometimes called a moving grave by her peers. Internal stigma happens when we internalize external stigma and the judgments, and we believe that they are true. Internal stigma also happens in the absence of external stigma and discrimination. Either way, self-stigma or internal stigma lives inside of us in our deepest beliefs about ourselves. It serves a function inside of us. It's not about blaming ourselves. It's our mind thinking that it is protecting us. If I think terrible things about me, then I may be less hurt if and when you think those things about me. So it makes sense then that to change self-stigma, the work is going to be deep and it's going to start from the inside. How many of you on this call have ever had that thought, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy? And, you know, if we were in a room together, I would ask you to put your hands up, and you may put it in the chat, just a yes, a simple yes or a reaction if you're able to. How many of you have ever had the thought, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough? And I can guarantee you, if we were in a room, all of us would have our hands up because we are self-stigma experts. It appears to be a human condition. This is internal stigma, and I discovered it for myself when I went through a divorce some years ago. The thoughts of being a failure, of the judgments of being unlovable and unworthy were just really, really difficult to bear. So the next slide, please. This is what self-stigma, this is what internal stigma looks like at the level of beliefs for people living with HIV. I'm inferior. This is a punishment from God. I don't deserve to be loved. I'm less human than everyone else. I'm dirty. I'm less of a person. So in short, to be really clear what we're talking about, next slide, please. So we know from probably the last, definitely the last webinar, the people living with HIV Stigma Index, people living with HIV reported 84.8% having experienced internalized stigma. That's a huge number. That was the report that came out in December 2023. So internal stigma leads to all of these things: not seeking care, higher levels of depression, lower levels of disclosure of quality of life, low self-esteem, and also it lowers treatment adherence. You know, addressing stigma and discrimination is at the heart of all the efforts to achieve the global AIDS strategy and its 10-10-10 targets on societal enablers. How can we achieve global AIDS targets without addressing self-stigma? But it's time to flip the narrative, to stop talking about the negative consequences of internal stigma itself and start talking about what happens when we address it. Stop talking about lack and start talking about gain. The next slide, please. So to better understand it, here is the socio-ecological model, which we use to show how stigma, discrimination, and internal stigma affects at the various levels of the individual, the family, the community, and the society. What would a world beyond stigma actually look like? If we stopped using deficit-based language, we could be changing the story and talking about self-worth, self-agency. And what you see here is, at the individual level, people would access their care and adhere to treatment. In a family level, they would participate in social scenarios. At the structural level, they would seek out life opportunities and be able to claim their rights. So what can we do about it? So At Beyond Stigma, we've been working for the past 10 years to try and better understand self-stigma beliefs and to design evidence-based information, evidence-based programs using inquiry-based stress reduction. It's a deep approach, it takes time, but the results are felt not just among the individual, but also within family, friends, and ultimately our wider society. We've worked with many different groups of people, from people living with HIV, affected by TB, sex workers and survivors of gender-based violence in many parts of the world. So I want to show you inside one of the interventions, and my colleagues from Zimbabwe are here to talk a little bit more later about it, but it's called Wakakosha. Next slide, please. So Wakakosha is an evidence program. It's called I'm Worth It. So the Shona language, Wakakosha in English means I'm worth it. It was named by the young people. It's a unique evidence-based peer-led intervention approach to address internal stigma and improve the quality of life of young people. It's integrated into the Zvandiri Peer Counselors Program, which many of you will be familiar with. It's a multi-pronged approach based on inquiry-based stress reduction, a technique of self-inquiry, and it's combined with mindfulness, creativity, music, poetry, writing, drawing. It's a 6-day camp, including a training of trainers, an ongoing community of practice, and an online resource bank. And very importantly, it is co-created with and for adolescents and young people living with HIV in all their diversity. So the next slide, please. To give you just a tiny look inside, what does the program look like? Based on formative research on the left-hand side, you can see the core belief categories. So you'll see that we're talking about beliefs related to guilt and shame and illness and fears and disclosure. And then we took those core beliefs and designed that into an intervention. And then you see the intervention curriculum sessions there next to the core belief categories. And then from there, you can see that we designed exercises that went into an activity book, an activity journal used by the young people during the 6-day camp. And then the inquiry-based stress reduction technique is represented there by by what we call the yellow card. So what it is 4 questions. So if you can see on the middle one there, you can see that one of the beliefs that was identified was I am unlovable. It's such a common belief across many of the countries that we've been working. And then we put those 4 questions against that belief. Is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true, that you're unlovable? How do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? You're unlovable. And that's where people get a chance to really see themselves, how they withdraw, how they feel, how they feel small, how they don't want to participate, and also how they treat themselves when you're believing I'm unlovable. And then the 4th question is, who would you be without the thought? Same life, same HIV status, but without the thought I'm unlovable. And then there are some ways to turn those thoughts around. So that's just a little bit inside the program. If you can go to the next slide, please. This just shows you one of the modules here. First of all, on the left, you can see that we're working with emotions. How do you feel emotions in your body, your thoughts, awareness of how thinking and thoughts happen. And then this shows you a little bit the curriculum, the module on body and sex, where thoughts like, I can't satisfy him, I don't deserve to enjoy sex, pleasure is over for me. These are the beliefs that we carry, that we really, really believe. And so these are some of the things that show you inside of the Wakakosha intervention. So the last slide on Wakakosha, please. We have carried out this intervention with research alongside it all the while, and this shows you some of the results. We've seen incredible transformation, increases in self-worth, body positivity, sense of purpose, improved relationships, not just for the young person, but in their family, in their friends, self-forgiveness and forgiveness and self-agency, and even entrepreneurial passions. So we've seen a lot of really good results. These are qualitative studies. And just to say, under the umbrella of the Global Partnership for Action to Fight All Forms of HIV/AIDS related stigma and discrimination, of which Beyond Stigma is a technical partner, this work is being supported in 2024 by GNP+, by UNAIDS, and by the IAS to be shared from Zimbabwe to Rwanda, Ghana, and South Africa. And I'm actually in Kigali at the moment, and the Zimbabwe team is on its way here to deliver this camp in the coming week to a group of young people living with HIV here in Kigali. So in summary, internal stigma, it's like self-worth. It exists inside and it's influenced from outside. When my internal world is strong. If you go to the next slide, please. My belief in myself, my love of myself is also strong. I'm more able to deal with the external negative judgments, stigma, and discrimination. When we can, let's shift the discourse from internal stigma to self-worth. Let's use the terms self-worth, self-love, so we know what our goal is and we know what's possible. Language matters, and we're going to hear from my colleague more about that shortly. Let's put people at the center and move away from deficit-based language that can be in itself inadvertently stigmatizing. Let's also stop our obsession with scale up and start thinking about reaching a tipping point. You know, with investment in training and mental health support of communities, over time, we can reach more people. Internal stigma is not an easy fix. There is no pill. It's similar to investing in education. It grows steadily over time until it reaches that tipping point within a population. It requires longer term thinking and patience. But the thing about internal stigma is when we do it well, it has a huge ripple effect, like we saw in the socio-ecological model. It can make real social change. So I want to finish with the voices of the young people that we work with. As part of the program, writing letters is a way of expression, and that's a way of expressing some of the big shifts that happen in terms of acceptance, self-love, awareness, and forgiveness. And this letter is written by one of these amazing young people to her own body following the Waukesha 6-day camp.
This podcast contains a unique set of letters and poems written by young people living with HIV following their participation in a course on self-stigma and shame called Waukesha, which means you are worth it in the Shona language.
Dear me, first of all, I want to say I'm really deeply sorry for everything that I have done to you. I was not proud of you. I was so ashamed of being you, especially when it comes to being born with HIV. I thought you were useless because of that. I hate you so much. I'll allow people to stigmatize you. After all, I started crying it myself, so I really want to apologize to you. How I can make it right by not allowing you to listen to people when they say bad things about you. I also want to make you feel comfortable, confident, calm, because Waukesha and you are worth it. 3 things that I'm grateful with is nowadays you don't care about everything. You make things easier. You stand by yourself. If someone wronged you, you confront him or her. So this makes your life easier.
To learn more about this program or to find out how you can help, visit www.zvandiri.org and www.beyondstigma.org. We are grateful to all our partners, Byron Katie International.
So thank you all for listening, and I hope you were able to really appreciate the incredible passion and words of our young people, the leaders of the future. Back to you, Beatrice, and thank you.
Nadine, your presentation was just fantastic, amazing, and very touching. I really loved it, and thank you for being part of this webinar series. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce our panel. So we will have in our panel distinguished people who agreed to be with us today. So we have Yvonne Gilleece. Yvonne is an honorary clinical professor and consultant in HIV medicine and sexual health at Brighton and Sussex Medical School and University Hospitals from the NHS Foundation Trust. She is a national and international leader on HIV and chair of the British HIV Association. So it's our great pleasure to have you with us, Yvonne. We also have with us Diane Weeks. Diane is the director of the Caribbean Regional Network for Positive People, the interim chairperson of the International Community of Positive Women from Caribbean, and the chairperson of the Trinidad and Tobago for Positive Women. So thank you very much, Diane, to be with us as well. And we also have Sungano Bondayi. Sungano joined Zvandiri in 2005, first as a Zvandiri recipient of care and graduating to become a Zvandiri employee, where she is currently the Knowledge, Evidence, and Innovations Officer. She is part of the Communication Tool Development team for Zvandiri, which is committed to the meaningful engagement of young people in the design and testing of program tools for improved access for HIV instruments. So we will have, I will pose now some questions to you, and we hope this discussion can be very interactive. So I have a question first to Sungano. We have heard about Wakakosha, the Wakakosha program, amazing program, and how effective it has been at reducing internalized stigma. In your opinion, what is the key for its success?
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Confirm you can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right. What I think has been key to its success, and echoing to what Nadine has presented, is that Wakakosha is a peer-led intervention, meaning the intervention was co-created and is being delivered by peers. So it's all peers connecting with each other. The program utilizes the Zvandiri peer-led model that most people know, where young people living with HIV serve as mentors and facilitators, and young people better understand each other, which makes them free to open to each other, thus creating a sense of understanding, empowerment, which can be difficult to achieve through other means. There's also the component that Nadine mentioned around inquiry. We're excited, we've been able to show that what is used by adults is also possible and effective when it comes to young people. The inquiry-based stress reduction model at first was this sophisticated model, but through adaptation and co-creating it to be youth responsive, it has been a success. It's amazing seeing young people getting to question their thinking around stressful thoughts, which helps them to move from shame to self-worth. There's also the component of creativity, which Nadine spoke about within Wakakosha. And yeah, I'm talking about the music, poetry, art, writing, which is so important for engaging young people. And from our experience as Zvandiri, this is highly therapeutic. We have also managed to involve the broader community, and that is our caregivers. We have not just engaged young people in understanding their needs when it comes to addressing self-stigma and how they cope, but we have gone a step further to engage and capacitate their support system, which is their caregivers back at home. Caregivers are such an important component when it comes to promoting self-worth for our youth, and having them go through the same training that has given them the strength and capacity to be better placed when it comes to supporting their children, adolescents, and young people living with HIV at community level. And lastly, I have known many of the young people who are within the Wakakosha project. I've known them for many years, and these young people, I thought they had accepted their status, but only to realize through Wakakosha that there were bigger issues embedded or being covered up and placed at the back of their minds. And for more information, I think I'll give this time to Purity, a community adolescent treatment supporter with Wakakosha, to share his experience. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Auntie Sungano. So, hi everyone. My name is Purity Mfarwa, and I was born living with HIV and have been on treatment for 15 years now. For the past 2 years, I've been serving as a Zvandiri peer counselor and supporting my peers who are also living with HIV. I thought I had accepted my HIV status, but I then realized that I was masking my true feelings. I was still trapped in a cycle of shame and guilt and fear. I felt ashamed of my body and the virus that lives inside it. I felt guilty for being a burden to my loved ones and for the mistakes that that I've made in the past. I feared being rejected, judged, and abandoned by those I care about. But everything changed when Zvandiri and Beyond Stigma introduced the work of Baron Kate through the Wakakosha program. I learned to question my thoughts, to challenge my beliefs, and to find peace in the present moment. I realized that my HIV status does not define me. I am more than my status. I was a person worthy of love, care, and compassion. Through the work, I found true freedom. The stigma and shame that held me back for so long. I found the courage to share my story, support my peers, and to live a life that is authentic and meaningful. And I then realized that I should not just accept my circumstances, but to seek true freedom and explore the work for myself and to discover a life that is beyond stigma. Thank you.
It was so beautiful, Purity. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sungano, I have another question to you. We know Wakakosha has been implemented through Zvandiri in Zimbabwe, but do you think it is a model that could be successful in other countries, expanded to other countries and other regions beyond Africa? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Beatrice. Definitely, because there is such a huge need. We are seeing across the region, despite the successes we currently have in HIV treatment, prevention, there is still a lot to be done. Like internal and external stigma is profound and a key driver of young people's mental health and adherence issues. So we need something that is effective. We're excited that in Zimbabwe, as young people, we have co-created and delivered and are delivering this model. We know it is needed, and we really believe it has a big role to play in other settings. We are also seeing this to be effective with young people in all their diversity, including those using substances, young mothers, those experiencing grief and loss, LGBTQI young people. So it has a key role to play for so many young people in their diversity outside those living with HIV. And lastly, just to say, this is an evidence-based model. Other countries need and want it. And we're excited that this week, like what Nadine mentioned, she and our team from Zimbabwe will be training cats in Rwanda to deliver this model. And we've had other conversations with other countries like Ghana and Zambia, South Africa, who are interested in adopting the Wakakosha project. So definitely it can be used in other settings. Thank you so much.
That's fantastic. And I do think that this kind of program would be very useful in my setting, where our epidemic is highly concentrated among young men who have sex with men and trans women. So I see that this could be really empowering in our setting as well. So thank you very much for developing and making it happen. And I have just a last question to you. Are you able to get boys as well? As I know you brought us Purity, that was fantastic. But is it more are more girls coming, or boys as well, or boys as well?
So we have managed to balance on both genders. Yeah. So it's open to boys and adolescent boys and adolescent girls and young women and young men.
Yeah. Because we well know that adult men are more hard to be reached and engaged in care. So I think this is really important to bring the boys. So that yes.
So with Zvandiri, we are mainly focused on the 24 years and below. So within our cohort, those are the ones that we are mobilizing. Yeah. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. It's if you mobilize them as young men, adolescent, they will probably be more engaged to care when becoming adults. Thank you so much. So I will now have a couple of questions to Yvonne. So Yvonne, thank you very much for being with us today. So not everyone will have heard about People First Charter. Could you explain how it came about and what it is?
Great, thank you very much for having me today. So I'm one of a group of people involved in a movement to try and change language in the context of HIV. So the People First Charter was formed in 2021, but actually, if we think about the principles behind it, it started in 1982, when the Denver Principles were created by people living with HIV, where stigma was already rife and stigmatizing language was being used everywhere, to reject the labels that were being put upon them by others and to provide recommendations, not only to healthcare professionals, but also to family and to friends to whom this whole issue of HIV was completely new, to talk about language and responsibilities for people living with HIV. And over time, language has evolved, but we're still a long way from where we want to be. So, for example, I've been involved in the British HIV guidelines for HIV in pregnancy for many years. And in 2012, we changed our use of a vertical of mother to child transmission to vertical transmission. Why? Because mother to child feels very blaming. And also now in 2024, there are people with HIV who do not want to be described as women or mothers who are also having babies. So language continues to evolve. And so the People First Charter formalized in 2021 at a conference where stigmatizing language was continuing to be used, particularly in the context of research presentations. And so it was at IAS that Laura Waters formed this policy group, and there's a number of us who are healthcare providers in the context of HIV, academics, but most importantly, people living with HIV, to try and change the language as a collaborative force. And we're calling on policymakers, researchers, conferences, journals, and healthcare providers to try and follow guidelines and examples of best practice to avoid blaming and stigmatizing language, because language perpetuates the stigma, both externalized and internalized. And I think we cannot underestimate the importance of language.
Thank you, Yvonne. And since the charter was launched, what changes have you seen in the use of person-first language in the HIV and sexual health fields? Do you think these changes will impact the way that people living with HIV are perceived and treated?
So I think to start with the first part of that question, what we've seen is congresses, journals, HIV organizations actually publicly acknowledge that language needs to change and are officially adopting the People First Charter. So examples of that would be HIV Medicine, which is the journal of the British HIV Association. So all authors are directed to the People First Charter and asked to use the correct language when reviewing submitted manuscripts. All editors are asked, has People First language been used? And if it hasn't, it will be rejected until that language has been corrected. Other journals that have also adopted it are Lancet HIV, huge journal, so really, really important. We're getting out there. So as well as the British HIV Association for HIV, the Association for HIV and Sexual Health, pharma companies are also coming on board. So that's ViiV, we're the first pharma company to acknowledge and address this. Also the European AIDS Clinical Society, and then conferences. So we have IAS, so we have this group here. We have the International Workshop on HIV in Women, and CROI, probably the biggest conference, which is every year, on retroviruses and opportunistic infection, has also adopted it. So do I think things will change? My hope is yes. Have I seen change? I think it's becoming more pervasive, that language is important and we all need to address it. But I think when somebody uses language that is inappropriate or stigmatizing, the essential point is to correct somebody without stigmatizing them. If we assert blame on them or are unkind in how we change the language, we will not get very far. We will find people becoming defensive and not open to the language that we want them to use. So it really is about a movement of kindness and education to try and improve the language even further, because we still do have a long way to go. But even in my own hospital, I find people are changing how they say things, and that's really important.
Yes, thank you so much. This is such great and important work. And we do hope that other journals can also adopt it, because it's how we can educate people with kindness, but proper information. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And now moving to Diane. Thanks, Diane, for being here with us. From your experience in the Caribbean, what would you say are the challenges faced by women living with HIV that contribute to the internalized stigma?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. Women living in the Caribbean face several unique challenges that can contribute to internalized stigma. There is, of course, gender inequality, and the traditional gender roles and the power imbalances. They often limit the women's ability to negotiate safer sexual access to health care. In the Caribbean, a lot of the households are women-led, and so sometimes the economic vulnerability find women dependent sometimes on male partners who would have to engage in situations where it may not be the best. And so it also makes it difficult to seek treatment or disclose their status. And there are the expectations of motherhood. Sometimes there are significant pressure on women to have children, which can conflict with the HIV status and treatment. We also have issues around limited sexual health education, and the lack of comprehensive sex education contributes to misconceptions about HIV transmission and prevention, and the high rates of domestic violence, higher rates of inter-partner violence, and really make it challenging for women to disclose their status or adhere to treatment. And of course, the aging population of women living with HIV, having experienced, and this definitely may not be unique only to the Caribbean, but having experienced a lot of stigma and a lot of discrimination exacerbates self-stigma. So those are some of the unique challenges.
Thank you so much. Going back now to Yvonne. Yvonne, what do you think are effective strategies that we can employ in response to people who tell us that we are policing their language?
I think it's a really great question, because I think people don't like to be told what to do. But I think the reality is, all we're asking is that people be identified and spoken about using language that they do not find offensive, that adequately, correctly, appropriately describes what is happening for them. So we can use medical language and remove the word infection probably 95% of the time. So it's not HIV infected, it's acquired HIV, and be completely appropriate. We are getting the right scientific message across without causing offense to somebody. So I think if people feel it's policing, I think we should come back that actually this is more about education and about using language that people would like to be used in their context. My name is Yvonne. I want to be called Yvonne. I don't want to be called anything else that people want to call me. It's a bit like pronouns as well. We should be respectful and civil towards each other, and therefore it should not be onerous to use language that is appropriate. But if we are polite about it, people are far more able to receive that than if they feel they are being told what to do. So it is about calling people out, but with kindness. because most people actually aren't trying to be offensive. They absolutely have no clue how offensive their language can be. And that's the key. It's understanding that.
Yes, I think that this is a very powerful and important message.
Absolutely.
So, while we get Diane's sound better, I have another question to Sungano. What is the involvement of parents in the Wakakusa program?
Please repeat.
What is the involvement of parents of the adolescents that are engaged in the Wakakusa program?
Thank you. So within Wakakosha, we have noted that some of the challenges like that is contributing to the internalized stigma is the home environment. So as such, we wanted to make sure that this environment is supportive or capacitated enough to be able to support this young person when they are at home and when they are not with Zvandiri or with Wakakosha. So that is why we are now bringing in the caregivers to train them so that they are better placed when it comes to supporting their child. If the child is feeling a certain way or if the child opens up to them, they can be able to engage with the young person so that they can cope with whatever it is that is happening, because there have been many cases where a young person is failing to even open up to their mother, and maybe it's the fact that they are not educated or informed enough around HIV or the other things that contribute to hinder the growth of young people living with HIV. So having them in the mix who help our young person to thrive when they are in the community, away from Wakakosha, away from Zvandiri.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's really important to get parents and family engaged in this important discussions that take place in the program. So thanks for that. So Diane, going back to you, do you see a link between gender-related social norms and the self-stigma experienced by mothers living with HIV? What strategies would you recommend to effectively address these challenges?
There definitely is a clear link between gender-related societal norms and self-stigma experienced by mothers living with HIV. For one, there's maternal identity, and so the societal expectations of mothers as caregivers and nurturers can conflict with the HIV status, leading to feelings of inadequacy. And there is also fear of transmission. Are you all hearing me clearly?
Yes, better.
You're hearing me better
Yes.
now?
It's good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so there is the fear of transmission. We found that even though we have, and there's a lot of messaging around U equals U, there are still a lot of concerns about vertical transmission, which can cause anxiety and self-blame. And there are dilemmas relating to disclosure. Oftentimes mothers may struggle with whether to disclose their status to their children, the partners, or community, oftentimes fearing rejection or discrimination. And then there are breastfeeding norms. There are cultures where breastfeeding is strongly encouraged. However, there are also, for example, in the Caribbean, women living with HIV often, I would want to see, are given information that direct them to choose a particular breastfeeding pathway. And so the mothers may feel stigmatized when they are not able to breastfeed. especially when emphasis is placed on transmission and the risks associated. And so some of these strategies to address these challenges, for example, can be community-based support groups where we could create safe spaces for women living with HIV to share experiences and coping strategies. Oftentimes, the CSOs or the grassroots organizations who assist and sometimes lend support to women living with HIV oftentimes are underfunded and so experience challenges with supporting women living with HIV around the support groups. Then there is gender-sensitive healthcare. And so we need to be able to train healthcare providers to address the specific needs of women living with HIV. And also engage or have more economic empowerment programs, for example, offer skills training and microfinance opportunities to reduce financial dependence, and increase comprehensive sexual education programs, implement the programs that speak specifically to HIV, gender equality, and sexual rights. Then we also need legal protections. There definitely needs to strengthen the laws against discrimination and domestic violence. Oftentimes, laws are geared towards punishing persons who and I use these words loosely, transmit, or persons may feel that they may intentionally transmit, but we need more laws that assist with penalizing or discrimination and domestic violence. We definitely need more media campaigns, especially in the Caribbean, to challenge the stereotypes and reduce the stigma surrounding HIV. And definitely more peer counselors, train HIV-positive women to provide support and education to newly diagnosed women. You know, we also need to have a family-centered approach in addressing people living with HIV. And I will say people living with HIV and not just women, but we need to involve the partners and the family members in education and support programs, because we do know that support is key for persons to be adherent and lead a positive life. And then mental health services, we definitely need scaling up of mental health services, provide access to counseling. And one of my pet peeves, I'll tell you this, is that oftentimes, especially in the Caribbean, support is there for those who are newly diagnosed and for those who are experiencing challenges with adherence. But we need to recognize that HIV is a lifelong disease. And so we need to support, again, the grassroots organizations to provide the long-term support for counseling and therapy that would assist with addressing internalized stigma and promote the self-acceptance. And we definitely need more training in advocacy. We need to be able to train these women to assist with empowering them to become advocates for their rights and needs within the communities and the healthcare systems. So those are some of the strategies. Those are some of definitely the challenges and the strategies to address both the structural inequalities and the personal experience that contribute to internalized stigma among women living with HIV in the Caribbean.
Thank you so much, Diane. This is really great to hear such a beautiful summary. Thank you. So, Yvonne, is it possible for you to say us some words on the Catwalk of Power from the UK to support women to reduce stigma?
Absolutely, and it ties in really well with what Diana has just said.
Exactly.
So it was run by Positively UK, which is an organisation in the community here in England, but supports all women in the UK. It was absolutely fantastic. So the idea was that women would, any talent that they had, they would express. It might be reading a poem, it might be wearing an outfit they had designed, it might be singing, it might be movement, anything at all that they wanted to show as something other than themselves, that is something outside of HIV, but in a context of an environment where family and friends, invited supporters were there. But they were up on a stage and they were walking up and down as models would on a catwalk, doing incredible things, showcasing incredible talent. And as Nadine said, there is an evidence base that this is empowering, that it does actually help stigma. And these women were all ages. And as Diana has said, many of them had HIV for many, many years and probably didn't realize they were stigmatized still until they got involved in this workshop in preparation. And through that, I saw there's one particular woman who I've known since 2005, and I just saw her blossom. She came to me the next week in clinic and she just did that. And she said the chip on her shoulder was gone. She'd had it for years and she was just transformed. And it was so wonderful to see, because there was no pill I could give her that could make her have that feeling and give her that smile. And it was just amazing to see. It was so powerful. And so all of the women involved in that group felt exactly the same. Nobody came away from it feeling negatively about themselves. They all felt better. And it was just so wonderful. I was just really gratified as someone working in healthcare to see something working so well where I wasn't able to change something for somebody. It was wonderful.
That's fantastic, Yvonne. Thank you. And now I would like to pose a question to all of you, including Nadine. So do you think that the term self-stigma is a stigmatizing one? We can start with you, Yvonne.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of what you said, Beatriz.
Yes, I have a question to all of you.
Yeah.
I would like to start hearing from you. Do you think self-stigma is a stigmatizing term?
Yes, it is. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's the word and you think, oh, I have another thing to contend with. I have something else I have to think about. And how do I get myself out of it? I mean, I think it's a term that has been used because it hasn't necessarily been identified how to use a different term, but there will be a different, better term, I think, that people will want to use. And I'm not best placed to say what that is. So I will pass on to the rest of the group who will be able to speak more to that.
Thank you very much. We have just a few minutes, so please, Nadine, if you can say a few words.
Yeah, thanks, Beatrice. I agree wholeheartedly with Yvonne. Yes, it's stigmatizing. The word stigma itself is stigmatizing. Who wants to be, stigma means a blemish, a mark. I'm carrying a blemish and a mark. Who wants to have that? And I think our issues as programmers and implementers and researchers is that we're so obsessed with identifying the problem. And of course, that's really important. but that we forget that in fact we can reach beyond these things. And I think in terms of terms, you know, it doesn't matter if it's self-stigma, internal stigma, internalized stigma, it's all deficit-based language. And I think we really need to move to that language of that, you know, what's possible, self-love, self-worth, self-acceptance, self-agency. That's what excites us all. That's what we are as humans. And that's what you described, Yvonne, on the catwalk, as what the experience of moving from self-stigma, internal stigma, that's exactly what we get. But no one knows that better than Sungano and Purity. So I think they are the ones that are the experts on this. So I would hand over to them to hear what they think. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So Diane, please just in a very quick comment on that, and then we will finish with Sungano and Purity.
I definitely think it is stigmatizing. As a woman living with HIV myself, I often am upset when I hear the term self-stigma and not realizing, or persons not realizing that it is associated with trauma. So let's talk about the trauma associated with the different facets of HIV. Let us talk about the trauma of hearing you're positive and the trauma of being discriminated for no reason, simply because you're HIV positive. So definitely, yes.
Thank you. And now the last words by Sungano and Purity before we close our webinar. Sungano, can you come back? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think I agree with all my panelists and Nadine. Like, we always have these words that are like when we first start out, we don't think around the impact of especially to the people who are facing this. So I think I'm going to be posing to all of you that, yeah, like what Yvonne was presenting on having a people first language. So let's think through on how best we can make this something that people can be proud to open up around, instead of us stigmatizing them again. Yeah, I think that's it from me.
Thank you so much. Purity, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I want to add. So self-stigma itself is a stigmatizing word. Because the moment you think that the moment we say the word stigma itself is already stigmatizing. So let's find a way on how we can destigmatize the word stigma. And also let's find a way on how, let's find a word whereby we can say, which is not stigmatizing. Yeah. We as young people, let's find a way on how we can turn around the word self-stigma, and let's find a word whereby we can use or we can replace and then remove the word self-stigma.
Thank you so much. So I would like to close this webinar thanking so much to each of you. That was an amazing conversation. I would like also to thank our audience, very interactive and full of excitement, and also to thank very much to the IAS for the great work and support in putting together this webinar series. Thank you very much.